You're listening to the EFC Podcast.
Doucet Campbell is a psychotherapist who works with Shalem Mental Health Network. Like all of us, Stephen is confined to his home these days with his work and his family. That's what we talk about, how to live well in this extremely challenging time. Stephen offers some very helpful practical tips and ways we can look after ourselves and the people we love even better right now, where we all find ourselves. This isn't a vacation, says Stephen. This is really stressful. My name is Karen Stiller. I agree, and I think you'll really benefit from this conversation. Stephen, you work with families and individuals dealing with complex trauma, according to your website. And so my first question for you is, can we understand having to isolate ourselves during this pandemic as a kind of trauma, or is that overstating what we're going through?
Yeah, I think there's so many different types of trauma, and that word can be used in lots of different ways. But certainly, everybody's going to have unique perspectives on what this time is like for them and what that means. And I think it can definitely draw out stress, past stress of what people have experienced. But also just, I think, corporately, this is something, we keep hearing this word unprecedented. But yeah, this is an unprecedented thing that we've experienced, and things have gotten past the point of what we thought was probably possible. So I think there's kind of a corporate trauma that we are experiencing as well. I heard one study, I forget where it was, but stating that there may be signs of kind of post-traumatic stress throughout portions of the population after this, and I think it really depends on personally how we each deal with stress in our lives.
Yeah. Are there any generalizations that can be made about age groups or, I don't know, other situations in our lives that might make us more vulnerable to finding this extremely difficult? Or is it just a very individual thing? Like, for example, we have university aged children living with us, and I really worried about them. I thought this is going to be awful for them to be locked up with their awful parents. But they're actually, we've had really bad moments, but we've also had really great moments where I've seen them really pulling through. So I realized I actually don't have this all figured out, how people are going to respond.
Yeah, I think it on one level really is individual. I think some of us just, we talk about this idea of stress buckets, and we all have kind of different sized stress buckets, and the way we handle and vent off stress, and what's a stressful thing for one person obviously won't necessarily be for someone else. But I do think a big factor, a lot of what I've been focusing on and thinking about the past month and beyond, is just different cross sections of the population and how this is affecting them in different ways. I mean, I'm a middle-aged, I guess almost middle-aged man with young kids, and so I have a different level of maybe even control in this situation of I can continue to be working for the most part, thankfully, and still have a roof over my head that I can control those kind of things. But I think if you're living university age, where suddenly you go from a lot of autonomy and a lot of freedom and a lot of fun to suddenly being unexpectedly back home with parents, that's a big stress for not only the university students but also for the parents that maybe weren't expecting that. Financially, I think for a lot of people, that's going to be a big thing too, not having that freedom and that autonomy to be working or earning that money that they'd expected to be doing, especially if they'd just finished training. But I'm even thinking of, younger kids, and how, if you think back to being a kid and how your perception of time is so much different back then. And so again, I'm looking at this through as a dad right now, for me, a month or so, 5 weeks has not felt that long, and yet it's a long time. But I think for kids right now, that has felt like a really, really long time. If you haven't seen your friends for, 5 or 6 weeks now, that is incredibly sad. And I think there is a trauma there. I think as I see kids grieving that and trying to come to terms with that, and not really being able to figure out exactly why that is and what kind of the logic behind all of that. So that's just a couple examples. I mean, we could probably go through a lot of different portions of the population, as far as people with unstable housing, people that are living in abusive situations, people living in, even things like lodging homes, or living in places where it's not family. It's not even friends. It's just a kind of a group of people that ended up living under the same roof. And I think that naturally just really, really increases tension when we have to live in close quarters with people that that we don't necessarily get along with.
Yeah, no, for sure. You use the term stress bucket, which I should probably know exactly what you mean by that, but I don't, but I sense it
Mhm.
could be helpful. I am picturing a bucket filled with stress.
Yeah, it's actually just an idea, and I'm not even sure where it comes from. Again, it's something that I've used for so long now. But if you do actually look on YouTube, there's a nice there's probably more than one, but just nice little videos that talk about that. It's just this idea that we all have different capacities for stress. I believe that can change over time for sure. I think, again, my stress level, my ability to manage stress probably 15, 20 years ago, I think was much different than it is now, multitasking with children and full-time work and animals and everything else that's going on. So I think we can change that, and that can go up and down depending on physical health and those things as well. But it's just this idea of we all have a different, kind of a capacity or a stress level that we can kind of manage. And when we start to kind of redline it, if you think of that analogy, when we start to feel that we're hitting that limit, when we're feeling just overwhelmed, I think then it's time to say, okay, how do I vent off, or kind of release, or get rid of some of this, because my bucket is brimming right now and I don't have any more room for empathy for others. I don't have any more room to take on new things that still need to keep being done. And I think the really helpful part of the stress bucket analogy is when we look at the other people in our lives and how they're doing. And, if your partner or your child is also at kind of that brimming stress bucket point, and you're, trying to, be efficient or get something done, or have some goal met, and everybody's kind of at that limit, it's going to be a lot harder to do that if we force that.
Well, even to have that vocabulary within your house right now, that shared understanding of what we mean by a stress bucket, say, I could see that helping. I could say to my kids and my husband, like, my bucket is really full and
Yeah.
I'm going to my bedroom and you need to leave me alone for an hour or
Yeah,
something
I
like
think
that.
that's great. If we have some of that language, and just that helps with being, it's a real good visual, and people can kind of understand intuitively what that kind of means. And yeah, the challenge is when you're all at that top part and then stuff needs to get done. And then it's to say,
Right.
okay, how do we put our heads together and what do we need right now? Like a really needs kind of focus thing of, okay, we just need a night to just crash. Like, I don't know if that means we just order pizza, or if it means that we just do hot dogs or something more easy, right? But
Yeah.
then there's other nights where it's like, oh, actually, I'm feeling great. Let's put on some music and I'm going to make dinner, kind of thing, depending on your situation again, or trying to make it more fun, even involving, there's times I don't want help if I'm cooking. And then there's times where I have a much higher threshold for stress. So I might even, invite my kids to help, which sometimes can add to stress, of course.
Yes. Yes, of course, no matter what age they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like this language of I need, and maybe, focusing on others, like, what do you need? So I'm understanding, and correct me, Stephen, but we should be maybe trying to practice saying those things out loud, which we might actually not usually do. Like, for some of us,
Mhm.
it's hard to say, I need this now, or I need that. But this is a time where maybe we can be using those muscles a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think even if it's just by starting to have that language in our own heads, first of all, and just kind of
Okay.
saying, okay, I'm feeling, I guess, yeah, like I'm hitting my limit. There's research now saying that right now, with this pandemic and with social isolating, that the stress of that, a lot of people tend to kind of put their head down and keep going. They tend to kind of minimize that stress, or say, well, I don't have it as bad as somebody else. And I think in doing that, we invalidate ourselves. We kind of almost shut that down, saying, well, I should be able to do this. Like, this shouldn't be that hard. I still have a roof over my head or whatever. I still have, I'm able to pay the bills, thankfully. Like, it's not as good as usual, but things are okay. But I think to really just say each of our perspectives is valid. And if this is hard, which it likely is, even just on the fear level alone, of the unknown of where things go, health wise, financially, a lot of other big questions in society right now of like, what are things going to look like, once this is all done. There's a lot of unknowns, and we don't do well when we don't have control.
Yes.
So to be able to say, hey, maybe I'm actually just stressed, and maybe that's okay. And maybe my feelings here are actually trying to tell me something. They're kind of trying to tell me to slow down a little bit. And if we start to say, hey, what do I need, instead of not even going there, that can really take the pressure off, and that can allow us to then kind of tune into those shock absorbers and ride those waves of stress a little bit better, rather than just like, oh, stress is on, and it doesn't feel like it's ever going to go away. Stress usually comes in waves. Emotions come in waves.
Yeah, and we see that if I think back to times when I've been in grief, say, I can definitely identify those waves. I mean, you can be weeping 1 hour, and the next you seem to be okay for a while, and then you go back again.
Yeah, and I think we worry in the bad times, and the difficult times, we worry that we're never going to come out of it, and then in the good times, we worry that it can't last. And it's
Yeah.
trying to just be thankful and mindful in that moment. Like this is normal. This is what happens. Emotions come and go. This is how we were created, and to see those emotions as a strength, rather than feeling out of control and like they're a weakness, which is how I
Okay.
think we often feel.
Yeah, I like that idea of trying to view those emotions as a strength, because I think that's not my inclination. I think,
Hmm.
oh, get a grip. Like I
Yeah.
talk to myself in that way, as opposed to, just maybe experiencing what I'm feeling.
Yeah, and I think generally that probably works for most of us. For the most of the time, we can kind of truck along, and we do have a pretty good amount of control over things, and so we don't get to that point very often where we do lose control, really. And I think things like health, things like death and loss and grief, those are the things where we don't have control. But a lot of things we do, and so yeah, in this world today, we don't experience that edge point as often as I think people have in the past.
And it is possible, all those things you just listed off, which are some of the, worst things that can happen in our lives, death, loss, financial ruin, all of those things. It's possible they could be all happening to someone at the same time right now because of,
Absolutely.
yeah, the situation we're in. So can you, I'm maybe asking you to prescribe prescribe things, and I understand we're having this odd conversation in this odd time, but what are some strategies we can use within the confines of our own home to take care of ourselves in practical ways? And even if it's like deep breathing, tell us some things we can try to do to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can range from broader to very, very kind of almost mechanical or very focused things like breathing. Um, I think routine is the thing that we keep hearing, and I think we are creatures of habit, and I think there is this idea of um, especially if our brains are operating at a lower capacity right now, because of stress and fear. I mean, the amygdala is firing. The amygdala is just a part of our brain that fires, which is when we feel fear, and that causes our other capacities to shut down or slow down a little bit. So less decisions is better if we don't have to make a lot of decisions right now. It sounds like silly little things, but it does take mental load off. Planning your meal like ahead of time, or having, if you're able to do that, have your plan for the day, as far as what you're going to be, especially even just making for dinner, plans on what you're going to maybe focus on accomplishing that day. I tend to kind of say, okay, what are the things that I would kind of need to do today? What are the things that I would really like to get done today? And what are the things that aren't as important, but if they start to get done, that's great. Just having kind of that structure, whether you write that down as a list, some people like that, or whether you just have that in the back of your brain, but having, yeah, a structure to that. Looking at connection. So looking at the people in your life, and how are you going to be, um, not just, I think we sometimes look at it as like, what can they do for us, or how's that going to help us, but also how are we going to support them that day? And there's this book called The Outward Mindset, where we It's the idea of when any interaction we have with anyone, it's asking ourselves, how is this meaningful for them? And so sitting with, a young child and doing a puzzle, or, reading a book with them, or having a conversation with your older adult child, those kind of things are really meaningful for them as much as they feed us as well. So building in those times, I think even just focusing on the basics of sleep, focusing on even just basic hygiene stuff, I think is just good. And most people probably keep that going. But I think when we're really struggling, some days we don't. Um, I think building in things, I think first of all, too, to say it's not doing all of these things. It's trying to pick one or two of these things and just say, okay, I'm going to try and build that in. Things like prayer, and that doesn't need to be sitting down intentionally praying necessarily, but it can be just having that prayerful kind of spirit as you go through the day and do things. Or if you have a fear that pops up, to kind of, offer that to God. Yeah, things like practicing gratitude, things like having fun. I think sitting down, and whether it's playing games, whether it is kind of, this idea of feeding your brain and then also feeding your body. So sometimes doing things that help you to think things through and play with ideas are really good. But other times it's just good to get outside and move and just feel your body, whether it's walking or whether it's, doesn't need to be jogging or lifting weights or anything. But even if it's just kind of taking the dog out for a stroll for a few minutes, just to feel the cool air in the evening, those are some other things that are really important to be doing right now.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I resonated immediately when you talked about, a plan for your meal. Or for me, I have been cooking and cleaning really well. Those
Good.
are
Yeah.
the two areas. And by day two, I realized, oh, this is a little bit about control for me. Like
Yeah.
these things I can control, and they actually benefit my family at the same time. And so, this is a good stream to be in. Yeah, so helpful. And that idea of the outward mindset, I really love that too, because thinking about how we can sort of tend to the people that we are living with, as much as they will allow us. I think my guess is, as a parent of now adult children, it's maybe easier when they're younger, but for me to take cues from my older kids and understand when the door is open a crack, because I can see when those times are, and step through and see, yeah, what can I offer you. I think that's a beautiful thought.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's a great way to put it. I think fear really does shut down our ability to have empathy for people, and so to reach out and try and look at the world right now through, as you started out today with talking about how is this impacting all sorts of different people right now. That's a really different thought than like, woe is me, this is really hard kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's just so many people that are going to be impacted in such profound ways after this. One thing I'd say too, the idea of anger, because I think anger is that's the explosive one that can come up in homes right now and with
Hmm.
families. We have these kind of, generally people truck through the day and things are okay, but every now and then there might be these blow ups, whether it's kids fighting, whether it's us yelling to get something done, or all these things that can happen. Anger can be very, come out in big behavior of yelling and things much worse than that even, but it can also just be this underlying thing that kind of is stewing and that we never really say out loud, but we feel this irritableness. And I think anger is also another real kind of harbinger. It's like to say, what is underneath that anger? There's often this talk of, and this will probably be from a lot of people will be familiar with this, but the iceberg of anger, and the top 10% of the iceberg is what's peeking out the top. And anger is kind of safe to show, or at least it feels less vulnerable to show. But underneath that can be disappointment. It can just be, yeah, again, fear. It can be sadness. It can be loneliness. It can be a grieving. So sometimes when we see big anger, or when we're experiencing it ourselves, or when we're seeing other people in our lives showing that, it's a good time to kind of at least start to say to yourself, okay, what's underneath this? Like, what's going on here? Because that was a big reaction for something I don't understand, or I don't quite see the connection there. And that can start to help you have empathy for yourself and for the other people in your life.
Yeah, I think that's so important. When you were talking about that, what is underneath it, and I try to do that in my own life, and often for me it is fear. But how do we if we're dealing with someone who's angry, it probably doesn't help in that second to say, "Are you afraid?"
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
how do we help our family members who may not, maybe it's our university age kids who may not have been, they may not think about anger like that yet. Do we just wait and talk about it with them later?
I think often it's waiting for, we talk about this idea of, from dialectical behavior therapy, it's this idea of emotional mind and reasonable mind, and a balance of those is kind of wise mind. And if somebody is in emotional mind, they're emotionally dysregulated, meaning there's just big ups and downs happening. And so to be able to, yeah, often I think give somebody space and time for that to come back down first. And then, when that happens, and we do the same thing ourselves. I mean, there's that saying, don't let the sun go down on your anger. I think sometimes it might actually be okay to say, okay, if we're both really angry, or we're all angry right now, maybe we actually just go to bed. And
Yes, yes.
tomorrow maybe, well, this won't feel as intense because just physiologically our bodies aren't going to hold on to anger through a night's sleep. It might take a long time to fall asleep, but if you're like me, but the next day, then we can say, okay, what was going on there? Let's take a look at this. And yeah, again, everybody's going to have a different level of capacity and ability and desire to be engaged in a conversation like that. One of my kids would love to do that. The other one would kind of plug their ears and leave. So
Yeah.
it's trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to do that in a way. I think reflective listening, just sitting with someone, even if that's just, again, playing cards, any kind of way to be present with them, whether that is, right now it's difficult, but they say with a lot of adolescents, driving in the car is a good time to talk because it's not as, you're not facing them, right. It's less intimidating. You're not sitting face to face. You're not there for the purpose of talking. You're driving somewhere. And so you can kind of say, hey, how you doing? And they might give you something and they might not. But when it is this focus, let's sit down and talk this out. Typically, a lot of people are going to find that really threatening and it's intimidating, especially kids. And so, yeah, I think naturally just finding a space to be able to sit and be present. If a great profound talk comes out of that, wonderful. But if it is just that you were present with them and it was a nice moment and it wasn't negative, sometimes you don't even bring up the thing that caused the blow up. Maybe it's just to reassure them, like, I'm still here for you. We're fine. Every family kind of manages those things a little bit differently too.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about families, that we can hold those things at the same time. We can have a blowout, sometimes, and then time passes and we still love each other. We can play cards, we can watch a movie or whatever and forgive each other. I mean, there must be a lot of forgiveness happening now in a lot of homes, I hope.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and realizing too, some people are going to physiologically have experienced anger or other emotions in different ways. So some people will, if you think of things like your heart pounding, feel that muscle tension, intense breathing, some of those things. Some people are going to experience that in bigger waves. They feel emotions bigger, and it takes them, sometimes longer to come down. Actually, some people that experience it really big like that, it doesn't take them as long. They come down much more quickly. Whereas some people that, you wouldn't know what's going on inside them, but it takes them, say, 3 hours to come back down to kind of baseline where they're ready to talk. So yeah, sometimes to say, I might be ready I might feel okay now, but this person might still be really worked up and it might not be a time to do that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. A lot of grace. Grace is required at this time. Stephen, as we wind up, what are what is the silver lining? Is there a silver lining here for families, for individuals even who are living through this time? What can we look for hope and encouragement?
Yeah, I think I was talking with a friend a few days ago, and he was saying how, you know right now there's a lot of talk online and in the media sometimes. I think more a few weeks ago when this was maybe starting, but people were saying things like, "Oh, well, I have lots of time now, so this is a good time to like learn a language or learn an instrument," or there's all this talk of having extra time. And I think for a lot of people, that's not their experience at all. I think at the beginning we weren't sure what this was going to be, and now that the dust has settled a bit, as we're kind of getting used to this new norm for now, people are, first of all, exhausted. A lot of people that I'm talking to. Again, it really depends on your situation and what your responsibilities are, but especially for parents. I mean, losing a lot of the regular structures and infrastructure in place to like kind of be a parent, taking kids to the pool, taking kids out, even just having that break when kids are at school. We've lost a lot of that. So I think I guess there's this idea that with all that busyness, it feels at the beginning like, oh, we're going to have this wonderful quality family time and this is going to be good, but this isn't a vacation, right? And this is really stressful, and there's no clear end in sight right now. So I think that's kind of the fear scarcity view. And I think if we can look at this as what are some things that could be good that come out of this, what are the things, the strengths that we as a family and each of us as individuals can learn from this time. And I think a big thing is we all know that we do desire to be connected with the people in our lives. I think that's almost the baseline thing that we all have, is that idea of we want to be attached and we want to be connected. I think we're hardwired to really love one another and have that. And so I think if we can look at ways of building on that and having that intentional time together, and also recognizing that we can't do that all the time and that we do need to unplug and take those breaks from one another as well. But if we have this thing where this should be just a great time and that we should be connecting, and I think that's going to put more pressure on us if our expectations are going to be that we just manage this really well. I think it's okay to say, okay, I got to ride with the waves. I have to ride with the things that need to be done right now. I have to recognize that there's going to be rises in fear at different times and rises in conflict at times, and that's inconvenient and it really gets in the way of life, and it disrupts those things that we want. But I think if we can really say, okay, what are the things that we're going to learn from this? What are the ways that we can maybe grow as a family? What are the ways I can have that outward mindset where I can focus on how to make this, more something that my kids can endure in a way where it's less upsetting for them, where we can talk through some of their fears age appropriately on what's going on and how this is impacting them. Those are all going to be the strengths if we can kind of keep pace with one another and not kind of get scattered and feel like we're just juggling everything until this ends, because we're going to get tired if we do that.
Oh, Stephen, that is so helpful. How can people find out more about you and your work and agency online? Where can we direct them?
Yeah, so I work for Shalem Mental Health Network. And so that people struggle with the pronunciation, but it's SHALEM Mental Health Network. If you Google that, we're in Hamilton, but we have a network of counselors across Ontario and starting to be actually beyond that around Canada too. So yeah, if you Google that, you can find us. But if you call us, and even if you don't live in the the GTA or the Hamilton area, you can reach out to our office if you call us, and you can Google that, and they can connect. What we do is connect people with counselors all around the province.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Karen.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To listen to more and to subscribe to Faith Today, Canada's Christian magazine, please visit www.theefc.ca/faith today.